Greetings, dear listener. You're listening to the Jaunty Mantis podcast. This is Jesse,
This is Maddie.
and we are presenting to you today a special bonus episode.
True
Why?
story.
Yeah, why do we do these?
Well, the Jaunty Mantis is released in seasons, 12 episodes per. And the reason for that is so we have time to take a breather, get extra recordings done, make sure we don't fall behind. So if you're listening to this, that means that we're in between seasons.
We made it.
So we'll be back soon. And until then, enjoy this episode, this bonus episode. It's not necessarily about role playing game topics, but it is very nerd adjacent.
And we hope you enjoy it.
Yep. All right, welcome back to the Jaunty Mantis. This is a podcast full of creative questions for curious gamers. I'm Maddie, and with me is Jesse. Say hello, Jesse.
Howdy.
All right, and we have a topic for today, Jesse. What it is?
What do you think about etiquette as a skill in a role-playing game?
I think it's kind of pointless.
Yeah.
What is etiquette? Maybe that's the question.
See, this is why I brought this question up, because I don't really know, right? So, like, what's off the top of my head, a system that has it, Shadowrun, has etiquette, like etiquette street and
What?
etiquette. Yeah.
I don't remember this, and I've played Shadowrun before.
Chip Truth Ome. Like,
Wow. All right. Okay, Chummer. How do I use etiquette in Shadowrun?
yes, I don't know when you call for a role for that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is it a knowledge skill? Is it an applied skill?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it just seems weird. And it's one of those things like, I put this on my character sheet to indicate that I'm comfortable talking to this group of people.
Yeah. I feel like every role playing game should have a set of secondary skills or useless skills. Shadowrun does do this where you can like put some things down on your character sheet that really have no impact on the game necessarily, but they can be used. Like you can say, well, my character is an expert in, dwarven death metal, for instance, or whatever the case may be. And I feel like a lot of role playing games would benefit from something like street etiquette. Like, how do you use that in the game? We don't know, but it's on your character sheet. And if it ever comes up, feel free to use it.
I forget what those were called, like hobby skills or something, but they were a really great way to define your character
Yeah.
by their interests. I had a technomancer detective who had a hobby skill in like film noir movies. Like,
A technomancer detective. That's awesome.
yeah, he really wanted to be a film noir detective,
That's
and
perfect. And
he wasn't, because he lived in a dystopian cyberpunk flavored future. So
that's brilliant. Well, how do you use street etiquette? So the characters are on the street doing street stuff. What's street stuff? Like interacting with gangs and whatnot?
yeah, I mean, reading the gang colors like on the
Mm-hmm.
street would probably be like a street etiquette test. Or like, just like, I want to look for any gang sign, and I know there's gang signs here, but who owns this turf?
Mm-hmm.
That's a street etiquette. um
Or is that knowledge? I mean, is knowledge arcana in Dungeons and Dragons? Is that arcana etiquette?
See, I think this would be, for dealing with nobility, it would be like knowledge history.
Mm-hmm.
Or some games even have, I think this is maybe a 3.5 thing, like knowledge, like heraldry or
Mm-hmm.
something.
Yeah. I think this speaks to a larger problem, which is like skills are problematic in role playing games. And I think that's why a lot of them have either gone super deep into them or pulled way back from them. Like, would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think if you had to ask me, and I hope this is not an off the wall thing, I think heavy skill systems are what I think of as being 90s games.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
Like
Explain.
it in the 90s, when suddenly there started to actually be like viable competition for
Mm-hmm.
some of D&D's piece of the pie, um, with like Vampire the Masquerade, and Shadowrun gaining in popularity and all these other things. Those were all, they had skill systems, which Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition, which was the Warhorse thundering along through most of it, had a proficiency system,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't the same as like a full on skill system. Most of the proficiencies would rarely ever be of utility in a game.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember making second edition characters and be like, I guess I'll take Boyer Fletcher, so I
Mm-hmm.
can make my own arrows, but whatever. Um,
Yeah.
Admittedly, this is a 13-year-old power gamer who was doing that, so I don't know, but
Well, we were also kind of doing it in the early 2000s with third edition. Like I remember rolling a rogue and then taking the skills I really wanted and then spending the skill points on stuff I didn't give a shit about after that. And it's like the rogue as a character is the skill character. They can do all the skills, and it's like this all or nothing grab bag, like there's only a few things that the fighter can do or should be doing. They're wearing armor, so they're going to be impacted when it comes to sneaking and balance and even climbing and especially swimming if they're wearing, heavy armor. So, it like skills are just problematic in role-playing games. It's like if you look at D20 modern, skills make sense to a certain degree. Like if like having advanced knowledge in certain topics to reflect education or life knowledge makes sense because they live in a modern world that requires those things. But does the gameplay require it? That's the question. So when you have something like street etiquette, it kind of doesn't have a place to really land. Like I think the better route to go would be, in 3.x they had profession was a skill you could take, and like blacksmithing was a profession. And you're like, well, what does this skill get me? And they're like, you could basically just earn a living as a blacksmith. Like that's what it does. Like, is your character ever going to use this? I don't know. But it was like an umbrella skill instead of saying like, well, you specialize in weaponsmithing or armor crafting or whatever, tool making or all these other different disciplines that blacksmithing has an analog to in our real world. You know what I mean?
well,
But
5e does that too.
how does 5e do it?
With your background, when you gain proficiency with a tool set,
Mm-hmm.
Berdine can make leather armor. He's a leather worker. He has proficiency with leather workers tools. I never do. That's a
Mm-hmm.
part of my character I'm utterly uninterested in playing, but it's a thing on my character sheet.
And it makes me wonder why. Why do we need to have Berdine have leather working skills? Like at least in third edition, Dungeons and Dragons, you could craft gear. I mean, I don't know if that was any fun or if there was anything to it, but you could craft gear in it if you want. You could make magical items and armor and weapons as a certain kind of character. I don't know what adventure that ever fit into, but you could do it. And so does Berdine, is that ever going to come up? Is he ever going to need to make leather armor? What's the point?
No, and I mean mechanically, I mean this is maybe a lack of imagination on my part, but like mechanically, since there's no masterwork,
Mm-hmm.
which was the reason why I thought it was viable to craft weapons in 3.5, because you get that +1 bonus to hit and damage, even if it's not magical, just from it being fine,
Mm-hmm.
finely made. Yeah. No, I'm never gonna, I can't see a situation where I do that. I might, after last night's session, like craft Talia a sword belt of her
Mm-hmm.
own, and decorate it as a little character moment. But
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's falling under that dwarven death metal category, where it's like it's a purely like I don't know, we could call them story skills or something like that. Like the idea of Berdine like on his ship with his adventuring companions, and then in their downtime he's like working on this sword belt for this kid that he's inspired, because that's what happened in the adventure. Jesse's character had this very inspiring moment with an NPC kid where he was like, "Look, I can't take you with me; it's dangerous, but you should do the following things in order to become a great swordsman like me. And the character, he gave the character a sword. So I mean, it makes sense that like over the course of your adventures, until you see this kid again, you're like making them a sword belt, like but that should have something else that should resonate in a different way in the game. You know what I mean? Like it should get you inspiration or something like that, that you did that. You used a story skill.
Well, before the audience gets too sweet on me, I should also point out that I armed a 12-year-old who our party had orphaned with a blade and told her
Mm-hmm.
how to practice. So
Mm-hmm.
when she grows up and comes seeking revenge on the people that killed her family, um, it's a me. So,
I don't think it's going to go down that way, but you know, I think that this NPC has great story potential for Berdine, but the point remains, what things are absolutely necessary for characters to be skilled in. A street etiquette is something you could see a character having, but you could also, it's nebulous. It's like gather information. What does that mean? Like that's something a bard could do in third edition Dungeons and Dragons. They could gather information, or you bardic knowledge or something like that. And they were like, well, look, bards travel all over the place. They gather weird knowledge. You can make a special roll to see if you've ever heard of something like that. It's like, okay, that's fine, I guess. But what, how useful could that possibly be?
I do need to do a just a context accurate addendum that I
Mm-hmm.
throw in before we continue on this topic. I am aware that there were games in the 80s that had skills such as Rollmaster, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Call of Cthulhu, like percentile dice based systems. I'm aware that it existed before the 90s, but in the 90s, every new game had them. And at the end of the 90s, when D&D 3.0 came out, it had a skill system all of a sudden now too. So
Mm-hmm.
that that is why I explain it. Yeah, we've talked on the show before about the skills being a list from your character of what they want to do in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like in those 90s influence games where there's so many skills, it's like a optimization mini game, and I just don't know like
Mm-hmm.
who's the target audience for that. Are there enough people that find that fun for that to be a core part?
I don't know. That I think, I mean, maybe the audience, if they ever want to participate and write into the show, maybe and keep it brief, maybe they could tell us. But I really feel like you could just solve this problem by saying to your players, like, here's a part of character creation. Give me three things that you're good at or something about. What are three things you know? What are three things you know how to do? Like just well, I can play the guitar. Perfect. You can play the guitar. Well, I can run real fast. Perfect. You can run real fast. Well, I was a blacksmith before I became an adventurer. Great, you're a blacksmith. You know? Like what are the actual skills? Like arcana should be a skill that makes sense, right? Knowledge, religion, that makes sense that you would have a vast repertoire of religious knowledge, but then that kind of opens up a bigger question in the gaming sphere of like knowledge based skill checks, right? Like I've always subscribed to the idea that, not always, but the more modern version of me running games has subscribed to the idea that why would you restrict information from the group? If there's a knowledge check that needs to be made, like what happens if they don't make it? It's like you just made everybody's job more difficult, you know? Like you in third edition you could make a knowledge religion check to identify something at the temple, and it's like, so I put this in the adventure and the party never got it because nobody ever made that check. So like what a fucking waste of time for me and the player characters. Instead, why not do it where it's like, this is a piece of information, roll that, and you just give it to them and then you say roll knowledge religion, right? And then they roll it and you're like, here's some additional information or something like that, or here's, you know what's the dungeon world or apocalypse, powered by the apocalypse system, where they're like, um how does this work again? I'll give you information, it's up to you to make it useful or something like that. Do you know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
is that discern realities?
Yeah, something like that. I'm trying to remember.
which
It's
is like
like,
the know things from Dungeon World. That's your knowledge skill check. And I
mm-hmm,
think that gives you the idea. I don't know. One thing I thought was really this, I guess this is tangential, is that an exalted, your kind of lore skill lets you like insert a fact about the
mm-hmm,
thing when you make the skill check. Like you roll your dice, wits plus lore, and then you can just say like, oh no, it's like this. And that
mm-hmm.
becomes true in the world, which I thought was really neat as an idea.
Yeah, I mean, why not use those? I mean, maybe this opens up a larger conversation about skills because when you look at skills like diplomacy or persuasion or intimidation, um, when you put those up against somebody who can make a good point, even if they don't have that ability, if they can like you make a roll and you convince somebody to do something that they never would have let you do otherwise, like how does that make sense?
Yeah, you wouldn't. They're just not going to call the guards on you when they tell you no because they're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, no, you seem like a good guy. I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes more sense.
Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people, I think, play a good diplomacy role like it's, mind control. And I don't think it's ever intended to be mind
Yeah.
control. It's being like, I've won this guy over. They like me now. But like, the list of people that if I'm paid to guard a door, the list of people I would let through that door when I've been told to let no one through that door is like very small. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you, my children, and my wife. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
still gonna look at you all weird, like, really,
Mm-hmm. I got to
really.
get in there. I'm not going to steal anything. But I just really need to go in there. Yeah, I mean, isn't it better to do a diplomacy check as in like you've improved their attitude or whatever the case may be, but they're not going to go against what they set out to do. But then like cuz in again in 3 XD and D you had like the people it was called the diplomancer and it was a build that was using exactly what you were talking about where it's like you could just make characters do whatever you wanted because you had quote unquote diplomacy, like you should come up with a good reason, like, why you should be able to make somebody do something that they wouldn't normally do.
There's a build in Exalted for Lunar Exalted, the shapeshifters called like the Pretty Kitty build,
Hmm.
where it lets you take some charm combination so you can use all your manipulation and charms as a cat, so you don't even have to talk to people, but you can basically just by being a pretty kitty overwrite what's
Mm-hmm.
most important to them in their lives, like we'll
Mm-hmm.
just hanging out as a cat, and that's actually very appropriate for Exalted. um
Yeah. Well, I would love to see that in action. I think I think for me, if I was making a role playing game right now, whether it was Exalted or Dungeons and Dragons or Shadowrun, that social skill would just be called manipulation. And succeeding on it would allow you to learn information that puts the person you're talking to at risk. If that makes any sense.
yeah, no, that makes sense. That kind of makes me think about, there's this thing I've seen Matt Mercer do where he's like, you pick as the player whether you're rolling
Mm-hmm.
deception or what's the make friends one?
Persuasion, deception,
Pers- yeah,
intimidation.
persuasion or deception. You don't tell which, you just say your die roll and he compares the number. And then I'm like, I don't actually see the utility of that.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think they're all three the same skill regardless, right? Like, what is deception? Like, if I'm like hiding a weapon that's a deception, right? But that could also be sleight of hand, or that could just be a dex check. It just
Yeah.
seems unnecessary.
Well, the best version of that is from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and it's
How
called
did that work?
Blather.
Okay, blather.
Yeah, and it's just to like talk on and on endlessly as a distraction.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen this. The redline, the D20 Horizon hack of 3.x that
Oh,
is
blast from the past.
that is Mad Max themed. They have something like that with one of the characters where you just talk and talk and talk, and you just wear him down with talking, you know. And I think the example in the book they give is like you're talking this person's ear off, and then your friends are robbing them blind behind you, or behind them, I should say.
That
But
is a very Mad Max skill. I want to talk about that line for a second. Dear listeners, Fantasy Flight published Horizons in the early aughts, right?
I think so.
Would have been when it was. And it was these like 30 to 40 page mini campaign settings that use the 3.x rules for D&D. But there was Redline, which was Mad Max. There was what was the Tron one? There was one that was Tron. It was
Mm-hmm.
Tron, the role playing game.
It was, yeah. I will tell you in just a second. Keep
And then
going.
there was Mechamorphosis, where you played a giant robot that could turn into a vehicle. Wink, wink.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
The
then
Tron
there
one was
was
called Virtual.
Virtual, yes. And then there was Spell Slinger, which was a Wild West fantasy game. And
Yeah,
I picked them up at a Gen Con, and they were pretty weird. And
I
we
liked
did a
them.
Mechamorphosis game once. I think someone played a riding lawnmower.
I liked them. I thought they were, you know, creative ways to kind of just adjust the system accordingly and make something, happen. But, you know, I don't know if they had a skill like street etiquette. I think the Grimm one, there was one called Grimm, which was like, you're playing kids and they go to a fairy tale side universe, like a la, Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe kind of thing, or legend, or whatever the case may be. And there was, a catch-all skill that was basically like bluff, diplomacy, gather information. And I think it was just called chatter.
Hmm.
You-
So Into the Unknown, which I'm running right now, the 5e hack that makes things more like basic expert, doesn't have a skill system. It
Mhm.
just does everything off ability checks.
Mhm.
Uh, and what it does have, because it keeps proficiency bonus, is you have a couple broad areas like wood lore, um, or something that you have based on your background, and you can apply your proficiency bonus to any check that falls under that area of proficiency from your background. So it's
Mhm.
very free form, ruling, not rules. And so far, my players haven't really engaged with it. I think I probably need to re-explain again. Hey, you remember where you have those fields of expertise? You probably want to force the dice into situations where you get to roll with this, because
Mhm.
you're good at it. So
Yeah. I mean, I could picture, do we need a skill in jumping for a fighter who has like 16 strength? Like, does he need a skill in jumping? But a rogue
I
could
will
definitely
say,
be skilled in lock picking.
as recently as 3 weeks ago in our recording, maybe 4 weeks ago, we were talking about the marvel of why you do DC 5 skill checks because of
Mm-hmm.
Baldur's Gate. And I think they do need a skill in jumping, because the consequence of doing it wrong is hilarious.
Yeah, but you can use that with an ability check, though.
I guess you're right.
There's got to be a way to make skills like less meaningful but still relevant. I think that there should be a set, like there was trained skills in 3.x, and these were definitely skills you could only use if you put ranks in them. And then there was untrained skills, which were skills that anybody could use, and I think that those got transformed into a just base ability checks using the proficiency bonus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like I can't, I don't know. My breadth of games played or read is nowhere close to yours, but I'm having trouble thinking of a game that uses an in-depth skill system that actually matters. I mean, can you think of anyone? I know I'm kind of any of them. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but
I mean, I can think of a lot of them where the skill system matters, but I can't think a lot of them where all the skills are sort of like where it's not a character creation trap on some of them
mm-hmm,
towards like system mastery, you know.
mm-hmm. I mean, maybe this speaks to a bigger problem, which is there's only certain kinds of classes you can make in a role playing game. You know, like you got the fighter, you got the spellcaster, and then I guess you got a skill user, right?
Well, in a D&D system, so like all the storyteller games, like everybody gets the same number of dots to put into their skills.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just what their focus is going to be different between characters because there's, well, I don't even know how many skills there are in 5e. I want to say like 18, something like that.
Yeah, I think there's 18.
And
I
like in a White Wolf game, there can be 30, like,
mm,
and
wow.
yeah, not to say like Warhammer Fantasy, like I want to say there's probably like 50 skills, but they're so unique and weird and situationally,
Really?
yeah, like Blather. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because there's like 10 common lore spell like skills, like,
Mm-hmm. And yet fighting is not a skill and spellcasting is not a skill in most of these games.
yep.
I don't know. If we can
I
find a
mean,
way for etiquette to be used, I'm all ears.
it's one of those weird ones. I would say just it should be like whatever your etiquette rating and as a bonus to your social interactions with that group is probably way easier than making someone.
Yeah. I've seen systems that just get rid of skills and then use like a base mechanic. And then I wonder if on top of that, you're like, well, I'm good at this thing. And then you write it down in the moment. And then from that point forward, that's what you're skilled in. I don't know. There has to be a way because the problem is then the characters can just be good at anything that they do. Right. And that seems unrealistic to me. You know, I know we're playing a fantasy game with swords and sorcery and dragons and vampires and shit, but it just seems unrealistic that all characters can do all things, you know?
Yep. Yep.
All right. Did we beat this one to death yet?
I think we did. I think we did.
All right, listeners, if you have any ideas or suggestions for skill-based systems, I mean, how do you handle it in your games? Do you have a fighter who can make an arcana check and be a blacksmith and do lock picking, or do you strictly hold them to the skills they use? Like in Baldur's Gate 3, my main character right now is a skill user. So maybe I have to shut up and take my own medicine here. But like it's useful in a video game. In Baldur's Gate 3, it's useful to have like arcana and religion and stuff because you pick up extra information that is helping you in the game. So why doesn't that exactly translate into the play experience on a tabletop game? Oh well.
Yeah, I think it should. And see our episode, Can Baldur's Gate Improve D&D?
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Jesse, if they want to write in and keep it brief, where can they reach us at, our lovely listeners?
You can reach us at jauntymantis@gmail.com. And we are also on Threads at jauntymantis and Instagram at jauntymantis.
Yeah. Juwanti Mantis on X.
On X, yes. I don't know how to access that account anymore. So
Perfect. Use that account, people. All right. Well, until next time, for me, for Jesse, for all skill users, skill checks, difficulty classes, and weird things that you can know, like Dwarven death metal, get out there and play some fucking games.
Go pass your etiquette check so the gang accepts you as one of their own.